A mob boss made a joke about Bruce Lee's dead brother. His calm response shocked everyone. It was late March 1971, and Bruce Lee had just returned to Los Angeles from Hong Kong, where he'd wrapped filming on The Big Boss, a movie that would soon make him a legend across Asia, though America didn't know it yet. He'd been back in the States for barely 72 hours when the invitation arrived at his Bel Air home, hand-delivered by a kid in a black Cadillac who couldn't have been more than 19. Not a request. A summons wrapped in velvet words. Johnny the Hammer Marchetti wanted to meet the little Chinese actor everyone was talking about. Bruce knew who Marchetti was. Everyone in LA knew. The man controlled half the gambling dens from Chinatown to Santa Monica, had judges in his pocket and politicians on his payroll. He was old-school Sicilian mob, the kind of man who smiled while ordering executions and attended Mass every Sunday with blood still fresh under his fingernails. Crossing Marchetti wasn't just dangerous. It was suicidal. But Bruce Lee had never been a man who bent his knee to fear. He sat now at the far end of a mahogany table that could easily seat 20. His spine perfectly straight. His hands resting with deliberate calm on the armrests of an oversized leather chair that tried to swallow him whole. The chair was a power play he recognized immediately. Too big, too soft, designed to make a man sink down and feel small. Bruce sat forward instead, his feet planted flat on the Persian rug beneath him, his center of gravity low and balanced. Around him, men in expensive suits laughed too loud, drank too much, and eyed him like a curiosity in a zoo. These weren't movie producers or martial artists or the Hollywood phonies Bruce had learned to navigate with careful diplomacy. These were made men, soldiers and captains in one of Los Angeles's most feared crime families. Men who settled disputes with baseball bats and ice picks. Men for whom violence was a language more fluent than English. Marchetti sat at the head of the table like a Roman emperor, a mountain of a man with silver hair slicked back with enough pomade to grease an engine. His face looked like it had been carved from granite with a dull chisel, all hard angles and scar tissue. A road map of every fight he'd survived and every enemy he'd buried. He wore a ring on every finger, each one a trophy from someone else's mistake. Gold, platinum, a ruby the size of a marble that caught the light like a drop of frozen blood. "So, this is the kung fu guy," Marchetti said, his voice like gravel scraping against steel, like bones breaking in a closed fist. He took a long pull from a Cuban cigar that probably cost more than most men made in a week. "My nephew, Paulie, won't shut up about you. Says you can kick faster than a man can blink. Says you broke 3 boards with 1 punch at some demonstration in Chinatown." Bruce didn't smile. His eyes, dark, unflinching, absolutely calm, never left Marchetti's face. "4 boards," he said quietly. "Your nephew has good eyes, but his memory needs work." The room erupted in laughter, but it was the kind of laughter that had edges, sharp, testing, waiting to see if the joke was on them or him. Several of the men exchanged glances, unsure whether to admire Bruce's balls or prepare for the inevitable moment when Marchetti would crush him for the disrespect. Marchetti's expression didn't change. He studied Bruce the way a butcher studies a side of beef, calculating where to make the first cut. "You got confidence. I'll give you that," Marchetti said, ash from his cigar falling onto his silk tie without him noticing or caring. "Most men, they come in here, they're shaking so hard they can barely hold their drink. You look like you're sitting in a damn Starbucks." "I don't drink coffee," Bruce replied, his voice still quiet, still controlled. "It makes the mind restless, clouds the water." One of Marchetti's lieutenants, a thick-necked enforcer named Sal with hands like canned hams, leaned forward. "What the hell does that mean? Clouds the water. You talk like a fortune cookie, Bruce." Bruce turned his gaze to Sal, and something in that look made the bigger man shift uncomfortably in his chair. It wasn't aggression exactly, But it wasn't submission either. It was the look of a man who had calculated exactly how long it would take to collapse Sal's windpipe and had filed that information away for later use. "It means," Bruce said slowly, "that a disturbed mind cannot see clearly, and a man who cannot see clearly makes mistakes, fatal mistakes." Sal's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Marchetti raised one ring-laden hand. "Easy, Sal. Our guest is educating us." Marchetti's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I like that philosophy. My old man used to say the same thing. Johnny," he'd say, "a clear head is worth more than a fast trigger." Of course, he also got his clear head blown off in a restaurant in Brooklyn in '52. So maybe philosophy only gets you so far. More laughter, harder this time, with genuine amusement mixed in with the razor blades. Marchetti leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his considerable weight. "So here's the thing, Bruce. I brought you here for a reason. I got business interests, legitimate business interests in Hong Kong, Singapore, Manila, places where your face is starting to mean something. And I'm thinking maybe we could help each other out." Bruce's expression remained neutral, but every instinct in his body went on high alert. He'd heard this pitch before in different words from different men. The mob wanted to use his name, his reputation, his connections in Asia to move their poison. Drugs, weapons, girls, whatever turned the quickest profit with the least overhead. "I'm an actor," Bruce said simply, "and a martial artist. I don't do business outside of film." Marchetti's smile widened, showing teeth that were too white, too perfect. Expensive dental work covering the rot underneath. "See, that's where you're wrong, Bruce. Everybody does business. Your landlord does business. Your grocer does business. Even the priest taking confession does business. He just calls it tithing." Marchetti tapped ash from his cigar into a crystal ashtray shaped like a fist. "And in this town, in this world, you either do business with friends, or you do business with enemies. There's no third option. There's no Switzerland." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. The other men stopped pretending to be casual, stopped pretending this was just a friendly meet and greet. This was a negotiation that had exactly two outcomes: partnership or war. Bruce felt his breathing slow, felt his awareness expand to take in every detail of the room. The exits, the positions of each man, the weight distribution in their stances, the telltale bulges of concealed weapons. His wife, Linda, was at home with their son, Brandon, who had just turned 6. His daughter, Shannon, was 3. They were waiting for him to come home from what he told them was a business dinner. He thought about his brother, Robert, who had died when Bruce was 18. Not from violence, but from illness, from a weak heart that gave out too soon. Robert had been gentle where Bruce was fierce, thoughtful where Bruce was explosive. Their mother had never fully recovered from losing her eldest son. The grief had carved something permanent out of her, leaving a hollow that nothing could fill. Bruce had made a promise at Robert's funeral, standing in the rain at the cemetery while their mother wept. He would never bow to men who profited from other people's suffering. He would never compromise his principles for money or safety or the easy path. "Mr. Marchetti," Bruce said, and his voice carried a quality now that made every man in the room sit up straighter. Not louder, but denser somehow, like steel wrapped in silk. "I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate your hospitality. But I need to be clear about something, so there's no misunderstanding between us." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "I don't do business with people who profit from suffering. I don't put my name, my family's name, on anything that destroys lives, and I don't bow to threats, no matter how politely they're delivered." The room went dead silent. Even the clink of ice and glasses stopped. Sal's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his jacket, but Marchetti's eyes flicked to him. Just once, just for a heartbeat, and the hand stopped. Marchetti's smile finally died. What replaced it was something colder. Something that had sent dozens of men to early graves. "Threats," he said softly, almost gently. "Bruce, who said anything about threats? I'm offering you opportunity, partnership, a chance to make real money. The kind of money Hollywood will never pay." He paused deliberately. A Chinese actor. The racial slur hung in the air like poison gas. It wasn't explicit, but it didn't need to be. The contempt was there, naked and ugly, wrapped in the assumption that Bruce should be grateful for whatever crumbs white men chose to throw him. Bruce's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I've heard that my whole life, Mr. Marchetti. From casting directors who won't put an Asian man in a leading role. From producers who want me to play the houseboy or the villain who dies in the first act. From studio executives who think I should be honored just to carry the white hero's bags." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes burning now with something that made even Marchetti shift in his seat. "But here's what they didn't understand and what you don't understand. I don't need their approval. I don't need their money. I will make my own path, build my own empire, and I will do it without compromising who I am or where I come from. Because a man who sells his soul for success has already lost everything that made success worth having." Marchetti's face had gone red, the color creeping up from his collar like rising mercury. Men like him weren't used to being lectured, especially not by someone they considered beneath them on every level that mattered in their world. Race, connections, muscle, firepower. "You got a mouth on you," Marchetti said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "You know that? A big damn mouth for such a little man." "I'm 5 feet 7 inches, Bruce replied calmly. "My brother, Robert, was 6 feet 2 inches. You know what I learned from him?" Marchetti's eyebrow raised. "What's that?" "That size doesn't matter. Heart matters. Principle matters. Robert had more courage in his little finger than most men have in their entire body. And he taught me that real strength isn't about how much weight you can lift or how many men you can intimidate. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything." Something flickered across Marchetti's face. Surprise maybe, or recognition. For just a moment the mobster's mask slipped, and Bruce saw something human underneath. Something that remembered having principles once, before they got buried under decades of blood and compromise. Then, Marchetti's expression hardened again, the moment passing like a cloud over the sun. "Your brother," he said slowly, rolling the words around in his mouth like he was tasting them. "Robert, you said. The tall one." Bruce nodded once, wondering where this was going, every nerve in his body suddenly screaming danger. Marchetti took another long pull from his cigar, then leaned back in his chair, a cruel smile spreading across his face like oil on water. "Yeah, I heard about him. Heard he died young. Heart condition or something. Right?" The smile widened, showing all those perfect white teeth. "Probably for the best, you know. Guy that big with a weak heart. That's just nature's way of saying you weren't built right. Like a race car with a lawnmower engine. Looks good on the outside, but pop the hood and it's just disappointment." The words hit Bruce like a physical blow. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, the world went red around the edges. His hands, resting so calmly on the armrests, became fists so tight his knuckles went white. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring compressed to its breaking point. Robert, his gentle giant of a brother who had protected Bruce from bullies when they were kids in Hong Kong, who had taught him to read English by lamplight in their cramped apartment, who had held their mother while she cried after their father's affairs became too public to ignore, who had died at 22 with his hand in Bruce's, whispering that he was proud of his little brother, that he knew Bruce would do great things. Marchetti had just spit on that memory, had taken the most painful loss of Bruce's life and turned it into a punchline for the amusement of a room full of killers and criminals. The other men around the table were watching Bruce now with predatory interest, waiting to see if he would break. If he would lunge across the table and give them the excuse they needed to beat him bloody or worse. Sal was grinning openly, his hand now fully inside his jacket, resting on what was almost certainly a gun. This was the test. This was the real reason Bruce had been invited. Not for business, not for partnership. Marchetti wanted to see if the famous Bruce Lee could be broken. Wanted to see if the man who talked about philosophy and principles could be reduced to a mindless animal with the right combination of insults and pain. The silence stretched. 5 seconds, 10, 15. And then, Bruce Lee did something that no one in that room expected. He smiled. Not an angry smile. Not a forced smile. A genuine smile that touched his eyes. That carried with it something that looked almost like pity. "Mr. Marchetti," Bruce said quietly. His voice perfectly controlled, perfectly calm. "I need to tell you something about my brother Robert. Something I've never told anyone outside my family." Marchetti's grin faltered slightly. This wasn't the reaction he'd expected. 3 days before Robert died, Bruce continued, he was in the hospital, hooked up to machines, struggling to breathe. The doctors had told us he wouldn't last the week. And you know what he did? Bruce paused, his eyes never leaving Marchetti's face. He asked the nurse to bring him a chess set, and we played chess right there in that hospital room, with the sound of his heart monitor beeping in the background, getting slower and weaker with every game. And he beat me 3 games straight, because even with his body failing, even with death standing in the corner of the room waiting for him, his mind was still sharp, his spirit was still strong. Bruce's smile faded, replaced by something harder, something that made the temperature in the room drop another 10 degrees. On the last game we played, Robert looked at me and said, "Little brother, there are 2 kinds of people in this world. People who get stronger when life pushes them down, and people who get meaner when they realize they're not as strong as they thought they were. Promise me you'll always be the first kind. Promise me you'll never become like the men who mistake cruelty for strength." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended over Marchetti's head. Around the table, the mobsters had gone completely still. Even Sal had stopped grinning, his hand frozen inside his jacket. Bruce stood up, slowly, deliberately, his movements fluid and controlled. He was a full foot shorter than most of the men in the room, but somehow, in that moment, he seemed to fill the space with a presence that made size irrelevant. "Robert made me promise," Bruce continued, his voice still quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute conviction, "that I would never let men like you turn me into something I'm not. That I would never compromise my principles because someone tried to hurt me with words. Because that's all you have, Mr. Marchetti. Words. Insults. The ability to mock a dead man who had more integrity in his weakest moment than you've had in your entire life." Marchetti's face had gone from red to purple. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair so hard the leather creaked. No one, absolutely no one, spoke to Johnny the Hammer Marchetti like this. Men had died for less. Men had disappeared into the desert for a careless word, a disrespectful glance. "You think you can come into my place?" Marchetti said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Sit at my table, insult me in front of my men, and just walk out of here? You think your little kung fu tricks scare me?" Bruce tilted his head slightly, studying Marchetti the way a scientist might study a specimen under glass. "I don't want to scare you, Mr. Marchetti. I want you to understand something fundamental about the difference between us." He gestured around the room, taking in the expensive furnishings, the armed men, the trappings of power built on fear and violence. "You've built an empire on making people afraid, on breaking them down until they have no choice but to submit, And you've convinced yourself that this makes you strong, that this makes you powerful. Bruce took a step toward the table, and despite themselves, despite their guns and their numbers and their reputation, several of the men flinched. But real power, the kind of power that lasts, that means something, doesn't come from making others weak. Comes from making yourself strong. Not just physically, but mentally, spiritually. It comes from knowing exactly who you are and refusing to be anything else, no matter what threats or bribes or insults get thrown your way. He paused, his eyes burning into Marchetti's. You mocked my brother because you wanted to hurt me. You wanted to see me lose control. To prove that underneath all the philosophy and discipline, I'm just another animal you can break and control. But you failed, Mr. Marchetti. Because Robert's death didn't make me weaker. It made me stronger. It taught me that life is too short and too precious to waste it bowing to men who have nothing to offer but fear. Marchetti stood up abruptly, his chair scraping back across the floor. He was massive up close, easily 250 pounds of muscle gone soft, but still dangerous, still capable of terrible violence. His breath came in heavy snorts like a bull preparing to charge. You self-righteous little prick, he hissed. You come in here, you disrespect me, you insult my hospitality, and you think you're going to just lecture me about your dead brother and walk away? You think this is some damn movie where the hero gives a speech and everyone claps? Bruce didn't move, didn't retreat, didn't even blink. No, Mr. Marchetti, I think this is real life. And in real life, there are consequences for every choice we make. You chose to invite me here to intimidate me. You chose to mock my brother's memory, to try to break me. And now you have to live with the consequence of discovering that I can't be intimidated, and I can't be broken. The two men stood facing each other across the table. The aging mobster who had built his empire on broken bones and buried bodies, and the martial artist who had built his philosophy on self-mastery and unshakable principle. Sal started to rise from his chair, his hand emerging from his jacket with a snub-nosed revolver. But Marchetti's hand shot out, grabbing his lieutenant's wrist with surprising speed. No, Marchetti said, his eyes never leaving Bruce's face. Not like this. For a long moment nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The only sound was the distant clink of slot machines from the casino floor below, the muffled laughter of people gambling away their paychecks, oblivious to the confrontation happening in the private room above them. Then, Marchetti did something that shocked every man in the room, including Bruce. He laughed. Not the cruel, mocking laugh from before. This was different, deeper, more genuine, tinged with something that might have been respect, or might have been the recognition of a worthy adversary. You got balls, Bruce Lee, Marchetti said, shaking his head. Insane, suicidal balls? But balls nonetheless. You know how many men have stood up to me like this in 30 years? Bruce didn't answer. He didn't need to. 0, Marchetti continued. Judges, politicians, cops on the take. They all fold eventually. They all have a price, or a pressure point, or someone they love that they love more than their principles. But you... He gestured at Bruce with something that might have been admiration. You actually mean it, don't you? This isn't a negotiating tactic. This isn't you playing hardball hoping I'll sweeten the deal. You really would rather die than compromise. Yes, Bruce said simply. Because a life lived in compromise isn't a life worth living. Robert taught me that. He lived 22 years with absolute integrity, never bowing to anyone, never pretending to be something he wasn't. And in those 22 years he had more impact, more meaning, than most men have in 80 years of playing it safe. Marchetti studied Bruce for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he picked up his cigar from the ashtray, took a long pull, and exhaled smoke toward the ceiling. Get out, he said quietly. Sal's eyes widened. "Boss?" "I said get out," Marchetti repeated, louder this time, his eyes still locked on Bruce. "All of you. I want to talk to Mr. Lee alone." The men exchanged nervous glances. In their world, talking alone usually meant someone wasn't walking out alive. But Marchetti's tone left no room for argument. One by one, they filed out of the room, Sal casting one last threatening look at Bruce before closing the door behind him. The silence that followed was absolute. Marchetti walked to a bar cart in the corner, poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He held one out to Bruce. 50-year-old Scotch, he said. 3,000 a bottle. You don't have to drink it, but you should at least hold it. Show some respect for the gesture. Bruce took the glass, but didn't drink. Marchetti raised his own glass in a mock toast. "To Robert Lee," he said, and there was no mockery in his voice now, just a strange, weary sincerity. "A man I never met, who apparently raised a brother with more spine than anyone I've encountered in 3 decades of breaking people." He downed the scotch in one swallow, then set the glass down with a sharp click. "You want to know something, Bruce? Something I've never told anyone." Bruce waited. "I had a brother too," Marchetti said quietly, staring at his empty glass. "Younger brother. Vito. Sweet kid. Gentle. Like your Robert. Wanted to be a priest, if you can believe that. In our family, in our world, that was worse than being a rat. My father beat the idea out of him when he was 15. Literally beat him so bad he couldn't walk for a week." Marchetti's jaw tightened, old pain flickering across his face. Vito never recovered. Not physically, he healed from that. But something inside him broke that day. He went from wanting to save souls to not giving a damn about anything. Started drinking. Using. Dead of an overdose at 19 in a motel room in Reno with a needle in his arm. He looked up at Bruce, and for the first time, there was something human in his eyes. Something raw and wounded. "You know what I did the day Vito died?" "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I was already in the family business by then, already making my bones, and I told myself that Vito was weak, that he couldn't handle the real world, that his death was his own fault for being soft." Marchetti poured himself another glass, his hand trembling slightly, the first sign of vulnerability Bruce had seen from him. "But that was a lie," Marchetti continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "The truth is, I was relieved. Relieved that I didn't have to protect him anymore. Relieved that I didn't have to explain to my father why my little brother was embarrassing the family. Relieved that I could just focus on being what everyone expected me to be. A soldier, an enforcer, eventually a boss." He downed the second glass, wincing as the liquor burned his throat. "And you know what I became? Exactly what my father wanted. Exactly what this life demanded. I buried whatever was gentle in me right next to Vito in that cemetery plot. I told myself that compassion was weakness, that principles were for suckers, that the only thing that mattered was power, respect, fear." Bruce walked out of that private room, past the shocked faces of Marchetti's soldiers, who couldn't understand why their boss had let this disrespectful little actor live, let alone leave unharmed. He walked through the Golden Dragon Casino, past the slot machines and poker tables and desperate gamblers, out into the cool Los Angeles night. Linda was waking up when he got home, Brandon asleep on the couch beside her. She took one look at Bruce's face and knew something significant had happened. "Are you okay?" she asked. Bruce pulled her close, held her tight, breathed in the scent of her hair and the safety of home. "I'm better than okay," he said quietly. "I just remembered why Robert's promise matters. Why everything we're building, the movies, the philosophy, the schools, all of it matters." He looked down at Brandon, sleeping peacefully, innocent and pure. "This world is full of men like Marchetti, Bruce said. Men who've convinced themselves that power comes from fear, that strength means crushing anyone who stands against you. And if we don't teach our children differently, if we don't show them that real power comes from integrity, from standing up for what's right even when it costs you everything, then the Marchettis of this world win. Linda squeezed his hand. What happened tonight? Bruce smiled, thinking about the tears on a mobster's face, the crack of light breaking through 30 years of darkness. I think I planted a seed, he said. Whether it grows or dies, that's not up to me. But I honored Robert's memory, and that's all he ever asked me to do. 3 months later, Bruce Lee received a plain manila envelope at his home. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, a younger Johnny Marchetti, maybe 19 or 20, with his arm around a skinny teenager in a seminary school uniform. Vito, smiling at the camera with hope in his eyes. On the back of the photograph, written in shaky handwriting, "You were right. It's not too late. I'm trying." For Vito, J.M. Bruce never heard from Marchetti again directly, but over the following years he noticed changes. Anonymous donations to youth programs in LA's roughest neighborhoods. Gambling debts mysteriously forgiven. Protection rackets quietly shut down. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would draw federal attention or break the code of silence that governed the underworld. Just small, incremental choices towards something better. When Bruce died in 1973, barely 2 years after that night in the Golden Dragon Casino, Johnny Marchetti did something no one could have predicted. He attended the funeral. Not in the front rows with the celebrities and dignitaries. Not making a show of it. He stood in the back. An old man in an expensive suit, tears streaming down his face as they lowered the casket of a man he'd met only once. And when the service ended, when the crowds dispersed and the cameras stopped rolling, Marchetti walked to the grave and placed a single white rose on the fresh earth. Not for Bruce, for Robert. The brother he'd never met, whose memory had sparked something in his own. He knelt there in his $1,000 suit, knees in the dirt, and whispered, "I'm still trying. I'm still choosing. Every day, I'm still choosing." And then he stood, brushed off his pants, and walked away. Not a perfect man, not a saint, not redeemed or transformed or saved. Just a man who had been given a glimpse of something better, and had decided one day at a time to reach for it. Because that's what Robert Lee had taught his little brother. And that's what Bruce Lee had taught everyone whose life he touched. That strength without compassion is tyranny. That power without principle is poison. That a life lived in integrity, standing up for what's right even when it costs you everything, is the only life worth living. And that every moment, every single moment, is a chance to choose again, to be better, to honor the memory of those we've lost by becoming the kind of person they believed we could be. Bruce Lee walked out of that casino unchanged, because he'd already made his choice years ago. Kneeling beside his brother's hospital bed, promising to never compromise his principles for comfort or safety. But Johnny the Hammer Marchetti walked back into his empire that night as a different man. Not transformed, not saved, but cracked open. And through that crack, light began to seep in. Sometimes that's all it takes, a crack, a seed, a promise made to someone who believed in you, and the courage to honor that promise even when, especially when, the whole world tells you to do otherwise. That was Bruce Lee's real legacy. Not the kicks or the movies or the fame. It was showing people, everyone from Hollywood executives to mob bosses to kids in dojos around the world, that you can be powerful without being cruel, that you can be strong without being a bully, that you can stand your ground without losing your soul, and that the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy. It's showing them there's a better way to be.